Hello, everybody, and welcome to a new series, Climate and FinTech. We'll be talking about how FinTech can enable climate improvement as well as support carbon offsetting. Today with us, we have Mr. Sean Lee, CEO of Algorand Foundation, one of the greenest protocols in the industry. We'll be talking about how green Algorand is and what are the different developments we're seeing on the blockchain using Algorand, right? Sean, welcome. Thank you for taking your time today.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Look, we've been hearing so much about what Algorand has been doing and the overall protocols that are in place for making the world more greener. Could you run us through a little bit about why is Algorand one of the greenest, if not the greenest, blockchain protocol in existence currently?
Yeah, thank you again for having us here and talk about Algorand. Algorand as a protocol was designed to be carbon neutral. So what does that mean? That means the energy footprints that are required for our node network to run all of the transactions that are happening on the blockchain today are very, very low footprints. Mm-hmm. So much so that even as we scale, the computing requirements still stay more or less the same. And that was part of the design principle from our founder, Sylvia McCallie, when he was taking his design and his theory around how to make a decentralized blockchain, but at the same time having it to have the lowest footprint possible. Just to give you an idea, if you look at Bitcoin, for example, the average kilowatt per node that are required is probably roughly around 700 to 800 kilowatt. For us, is 0.00. I was told there were 6 zeros after the dot kilowatt. So it's basically near zero. Now the important aspect of that though is because this is happening at the layer 1 protocol, which is what Algorand is, that means everything that's built on top of it, the dApps, the applications, all of those automatically inherit the carbon neutrality that we have. And I think that's one thing that's very, very important for us, and increasingly more important for the ecosystem of developers that we're talking to, because the newer, especially the younger generation, really care about these things these days.
Yeah. I think it would be nice, you're an expert in the field, if you could just, for the audience, briefly run through proof of work versus proof of stake versus what Algorand is doing, so you can kind of measure the three differently in terms of impact, right?
Yeah, so proof of work, right? I think most people will probably, at least that have a little bit of knowledge in the space, realize that Bitcoin and Ethereum, the two large networks, largest network I should say out there in the blockchain space today, are proof of work. What that means is the tokens that are being used for transactional costs are being mined on this network, and mining requires the miners to actually solve some fairly complex cryptographic puzzles in order to be able to compete, to be able to process and approve the block. That's by nature how the blockchain works as it was designed by Satoshi 10, 11 years ago. That's proof of work. Now, several years ago, many of the protocols and many teams started coming up with the notion that the mining aspect requires too much energy. So proof of stake networks becomes available. Proof of stake means that you don't need to solve these cryptographic puzzles anymore. Proof of stake means that the availability to process and approve these blocks are actually based on the stake that different node providers are actually running within the network. So it requires much less energy to run, but at the same time, it still serves the principle in terms of what blockchain and consensus mechanism really actually need to run. So that's proof of stake.
Yes.
For us, we are a pure proof of stake network. There's a pure in front of it, and that's again by design. What that means is rather than having a set number of nodes, some protocols use 21 nodes validators, so you always know who those 21 people are, or some use slightly less, some use slightly more. What we do is actually we completely randomize it. We randomize how the consensus are being actually permutated, and roughly every time there's about 1,000 nodes that are being called upon, and those 1,000 are being randomized so that they are the one that actually approve the block itself. So the reason we did that is so that it increases dramatically the security element of this protocol, right?
Yeah.
Because any hacker coming in, if you've only got 21 no validators, you kind of know who they are, right? You've got to really protect them.
Yeah.
If everything is all randomized and it's 1,000 that within the network, then they don't even know who to go, right?
Correct,
They only know who that 1,000 is after the fact,
yes,
right? So that increases the security elements of our protocol, and that's certainly something that we're obviously very proud of, because I think as blockchain continue to become more mainstream and more institutional use cases jump on top, obviously that security mechanism becomes critically important.
Very true. I think security is one of the key things, and then of course changing the way things are mined, and moving from a proof of work to proof of stake. We've had Vitalik speak about how Ethereum, when it's moving to the proof of stake world, will start reducing the energy consumption of maybe up to over 90%, right? That's one of the things we heard from him during our last event. Now, coming to, you spoke about how, as a layer 1 protocol, you now have applications being built on top, right? And there's some very exciting applications that are being built, some of them around climate tech and a few others which are also very green. Do you want to highlight a couple of them that for our audience to understand how people are using Algorand to build their applications?
Yeah, a couple of examples I've shared in other sessions as well. One company is called Planet Watch. They're in the air quality space. So what they do is they have these community-run sensors all around the world, where these sensors are sharing information that they collect. So these are pollution information, humidity, and so on and so forth, and it's shared within the centralized within the decentralized network, so that then researchers that are really from around the world can get access to that data and be able to really map out how climate is actually moving and whether there are any type of patterns that really need to be paid attention to. The transaction, the data itself is captured on chain, but also more importantly, because it's a community-led project rather than government-owned, right? Which is what most of these air quality systems are. These community members that run the nodes or sensors actually have an incentive mechanism. So there's a Planet token, which is listed, by the way, that are incentivized to each one of them. So the more you run the sensor, the more you share that data, then the more you're earning in terms of that incentive. So that's one example. Another example is a company called Gaia Chain. They're actually out of Washington, D.C. And what they do is very interesting, actually. People talk about deforestation, right? So trying to preserve the Amazon and so on. But there are also a lot of places where the forest is already gone, right? So now there's this notion of forest landscape restoration, right? Replanting the tree, thereby so creating that counterbalance mechanism. But how do you incentivize people to do that, right? These farmers, especially in rural areas and underprivileged communities, very often in Africa and other places, how do you incentivize them to doing them? So again, this company is taking the authentication of these farmers and then what they're actually doing step by step. So it's almost a proof of engagement, so that it is actually captured on chain. And there is an incentive mechanism so that you can actually incentivize them to do so. But they also validate it with satellite imagery. Right? So they work with a very large organization, an international organization behind the scene called IUCN, and they have access to these satellite imagery, so they know the farmers are planting them, the forests are getting replanted, and they can actually prove that. Right? All of that information captured on chain. So just to give you some ideas around very specific things that people are really being very innovative around coming into this space, and I think it's fantastic to see.
This is very interesting, right? Especially because you're doing multiple things, and all of them are more or less on chain in some senses. There's authentication, which in itself is a one standalone application. Then there is the incentive mechanism. Then there's the verification from a geosatellite perspective, right? And so that kind of speaks a lot about the capacity and scale that is possible right now, right? So what do you think are from a scale and other perspective for Algorand going forward from a technology perspective? What are the key developments that we can expect for, especially towards enabling more scale on the climate side?
Yeah, so our chain right now already supports thousands of transactions, TPS, that's what we call it in our industry, transaction per second. So that's already a given, that's by design. we have a settlement speed of under 4 seconds, right? So that means you can send any transaction, whether it's monetary or asset, or in this case, climate data, really anywhere in the world in under 4 seconds. So that's obviously very favorable. We're continuing to increase the scalability aspect of it. So I think a key element from a climate perspective is you're thinking about these things, even the Planet Watch example, right?
Correct, yeah.
That's almost an at the edge example.
Correct, yeah.
Right? So rather than, if you and I are both here in Hong Kong, we see these observatories, these domes that are on top of the mountains. Those are all run by the government, right? They're fairly centralized. There are only so many of them that they can physically build. But if you've got a community-led sensor network, that actually becomes more of an IoT use case.
Very true.
If you think about it, right? Internet of Things. So the more of that's out there, the more real-time data feeds coming through, and that's very, very different than having maybe 4 or 5 of these laid around Hong Kong, a city like Hong Kong. So I think that scalability is going to be very, very key to be able to transact and process and store that information on chain. And then at the same time, again, to incentivize the users to be able to have that transactional aspect on the monetary side as well becomes quite important. So scale is important. And the notion at which the data is actually authenticated, it's immutable, it's public, living on a chain that all can actually get access to. I think a lot of those will really come into play as this climate environmental industry continue to expand.
So one of the things I want to bring in, and it's just an understanding for the audience to understand this better, right? One of the key elements that happens with Bitcoin and Ethereum in particular is when there's a lot of activity or something new, the network gets congested, right? And there's one element of the gas fees or just the mining fees becoming very high, but from an energy consumption perspective, because of the congestion, that means that more people waiting, there's more energy being consumed as they're waiting for the transactions to be carried out or approved or verified for that matter. How is Algorand treating these congestions, if at all?
So first of all, on average, we have roughly about 2 million transactions per day on chain, which is one of the highest in terms of layer 1 protocols. But thus far, we have had no congestion whatsoever, again, based on the design that we have in our underlying technology. More importantly, the transactional aspect, the fees that you talked about, it has been set as 0.001 algo. Right, and algo at close to roughly $2 US dollar today. That's a fraction of a penny per transaction, right? So you don't even have to think about, well, where is the ETH price at today, and am I going to commit that to right now, or am I going to wait later, right? In Algorand, you could do things in real time, right? Because the cost is so low and it's so fast. People just have no hesitation when things actually needs to be done. And again, when the world goes more decentralized, more IoT devices, more sensors that are being embedded everywhere, and all of that information needs to be captured, and then with an economic model being built on top to incentivize the community to do so, all of those will require throughput, and all of those require something that is highly efficient, but also extremely, extremely cost efficient. So I think that's definitely an advantage that we have.
Sure. I want to come to an initiative that Algorand has now contributed towards partnering with. In motorsport, we have some big news from a lot of the major crypto exchanges getting into the space without naming them at this stage. But you guys have gone towards e-motorsports, right? Could you tell us a little bit about that initiative and the goal that you're looking to achieve there?
So we have formulated a partnership with a company called Envision Racing. Which is one of the major racing teams within the Formula E circuit. Envision happens to be the winningest team. So we're actually working with, we're going to be on the podium quite a bit actually, if the winning streak continues. But the partnership is really on two fronts, right? When we look at both in terms of brand awareness from an Algorand perspective, we think motorsport, especially from an electric perspective, is really gaining a lot of momentum around the world, and that's certainly something that we look very favorably upon. But also, more importantly, if you think about the notion of what we're trying to carry, right? Being one of the greenest chain, we want to work with the greenest team. Right, and we want to work with the greenest team who's competing on the greenest grid. Right, so if you think about it, that automatically cuts out the Formula Ones, the NASCARs. I mean, it's fantastic. I've been to one of those races before. Very loud, very exciting. but you know the energy consumption is out of the world, right? So is that something that we want to be associated with? And at the same time, is there something in addition to just the racing aspects that we can partner with as well? I mentioned we're partnering with Envision Racing. And Envision as a company is actually one of the world's largest producer of wind turbines. And I think they're also one of the top in terms of electric batteries for electric vehicles as well. So actually that opens up a lot of possibility for this partnership to be beyond just the racing aspects, but also there are things that we can think about. For example, some of the outputs that are being generated from the wind turbines, right? All around the world. Can that also be tokenized? Can that also have some notion of community ownership? In some ways similar to some countries in the world where some stretch of the highway is owned by someone, right? Some share you can buy, you can own that, and you can say, I contributed to this. Well, maybe we could do that for renewable energy that are being produced in the world as well. So that's a lot of the possibilities that we're looking at. But obviously the racing aspect, like I said, is very exciting. And I look forward to seeing many of your audience here potentially participating and in different parts of the world and seeing the races
maybe
as well.
Maybe some algos as well, right?
We'll see about that.
Just building on that point about tokenization, right? In Hong Kong, we're seeing, and not just in Hong Kong, but just Greater China and other places, green finance is of major focus. The Hong Kong government has made it one of their main priorities, and you've had the BIS working with Hong Kong Monetary Authority in green bond and tokenization of green bond, right? What are the things that you see as, from the traditional finance moving into DeFi, the hi-fi version as they call it, right? What are the cute things? Like one of the things I'm looking at is also on the carbon trading and carbon offset world. But in your view, what could be done using in the decentralized world and efficiently?
So there are really two aspects, right? One is if you think about the notion of a bond-like structure, right, from an investment perspective, obviously the world is now really on this ESG, the train, right? So that's very favorable to see. But you have the traditional kind of fund structure, which required a lot of steps to get set up. And also a number of steps to get participation. And the payouts is also fairly structured as well. And there's a reason for that, right? And obviously that bond structure and fund structure have been around for quite some time. The folks that are now looking into using blockchain and crypto as part of the build out or the setup for green bonds is the notion that not only do you have companies that you can invest into or carbon credits that you can invest into, there are also now tokens that represent or that are from companies that are in the ESG space that are releasing in the market that could be part of these bonds or for part of these funds as well. So to set up an infrastructure that allows you to also capture the possibility of those tokens along with the equities and along with the carbon credits, that I think is something that's very interesting. And in a traditional fund setup, it's probably pretty difficult to do that, right? That is still somewhat of a not so clear area from a jurisdictional perspective all around the world, right? So I think that's one aspect. The other aspect, though, is if you think about a typical bond, right? There's a dividend that's being paid, right? And sometimes it's every month, sometimes every quarter, depending on the setup. And the distribution of it is actually not very easy to do. If you happen to be able to tokenize, right, the bond itself, you can leverage the capability of blockchain, and like what I mentioned before, the payout could be, in seconds, it could be in minutes, it could be an hour. It depends on how you want to set it up. You can obviously still do it by day, by week, by month, or whatever it is, but the capability to programmatically build that into the system so that this green bond that is being tokenized can have a dividend that's being paid out almost in real time. That opens up a lot of possibilities, right? So I think that's why a lot of people are looking into it. It's not just the green elements, but it's also the notion of what blockchain can really open up, right, in terms of accessibility, but also in terms of distribution as well.
Right. So we've spoken a lot about the green elements, and we were talking about, we are in the border of Web 2.0 going to Web 3.0, right? One of the key things about Web 3.0 is the biggest player in Web 2.0 being Facebook, in terms of number of users, right? And also ad revenues. Now renaming themselves as Meta and looking to hire 10,000 people to build the Metaverse, right? However, as much as the metaverse is something that's very exciting, to the possibilities of each of us becoming Ready Player One, the movie, and becoming players in that world. There are also these concerns in terms of the vast variety of protocols, but the energy consumption that will be go into creating the metaverse. Right? So, what are your views on that, and what do you think the metaverse could do, or as we build the building blocks for the metaverse to be more greener? Yeah.
So I think the metaverse we're so early into this whole conversation, right? And whether a centralized metaverse is better than a decentralized one or vice versa, that's completely debatable.
Correct.
No crystal ball there. I think it's way too early. But if you think about what most people are doing in the metaverse today, of whatever that's available out there, right? It's mostly some sort of asset exchange.
Correct.
Right? Virtual land, virtual collectibles, right? Just things that people are exchanging. Maybe metaverse seems so far-fetched, but those in the audience that are playing games, for example, I mean, a game is basically a metaverse, right? Yeah. So you have these game artifacts that are being traded,
correct,
and increasingly more so in an NFT manner, right? So if you think about the notion of NFT, which is tokenizing some asset, obviously in the metaverse, it's a digital asset, it's a virtual asset. Tokenizing that and then exchanging that becomes really the economy within the metaverse, right? Every society required an economy, rather otherwise it's not really society, right?
Correct.
So that economy by itself will have some exchange of assets, right? Monetary or in physical assets. So under that scenario, then the NFTs that are being created and the technology underlying that NFT will better be pretty green. Because in the metaverse, I would like to think,
of course,
things are going to go even faster. It's going to go even more vibrant, right? And you can probably think about all kinds of stuff that right now in the real world, we're not thinking about trading. In the virtual world, at the end, it's almost like a game, right? You can probably trade anything.
Correct.
So in that scenario, then the throughput requirements and the amount of transactions that may be happening in the metaverse may actually be even higher than the real world, which means the underlying layer in terms of where that NFT is actually created, transacted, really should be on something that is very efficient. Obviously, we are one of those, right? So working with Algorand, we've got a number of very interesting projects in that regard. But I like to think it's not just us, right? It's any blockchain that provides that capability, that really low carbon footprints to become the underlying layer of anything that's being transacted in the metaverse. I think that's a given, right? And whether you can continue to do that in things like Ethereum, or you really need to think otherwise, I think that's really for a lot of developers to really consider.
Right, I think that's a great note to end on. We look forward to how the metaverse evolves. Hopefully, we don't just have a greener world in person, but a greener world online virtually. John, it's been a pleasure talking to you, and thank you for all those insights out of Algorand. Stay tuned. We'll be speaking to more industry leaders and people involved in the climate fintech world to talk about how fintech can change and make a greener change. Thank you very much.